Hey. And
in this shot from Ghostbusters Afterlife, a terror dog stomps on Paul Rudd's car. But that's not CGI. It's actually a puppeteer wearing a mechanical terror dog arm controlled by a series of cables. To make creatures like the terror dog and this ghoulish skeleton hyper-realistic, makeup effects teams have to juggle visual design, classic puppeteering, and animatronics.
Instead of being an actor and giving a performance, it's getting 9 people to get a performance.
Making practical creatures look hyper-realistic requires plenty of trial and error in the design phase. This was especially true for Afterlife. To stick to the spirit of the original Ghostbusters, the team had to modernize the original terror dog from 1984 with as little CGI as possible. They started with these maquettes, miniature models used to nail down a creature's look before creating the actual on-screen model. Maquettes also give the visual effects team a real-life reference so they can complete CG shots that are too difficult to do practically, like when the terror dog runs through Walmart. This is when Arjen runs paint tests on a mock head to determine which colors look best on camera. For example, his team amped up the lip color in the final version. And a more detailed reference head gives a sense of what it'll look like under movie lighting.
So if he's in warm light, you can tell he's more brown. But if he's in cooler light, he's more gray.
At the same time, Afterlife animatronic designer Bill Sturgeon conducted a movement test by connecting a scaled-down 2D printout of the terror dog to brass tubing, a popsicle stick, and plastic cables. This is how Sturgeon determines the creature's biggest and most notable movements, known as the gross body move. Once a creature's look and movements are solidified, the makeup effects team will then sculpt the final design true to size. For Afterlife, they made a larger model of the dog out of 600 pounds of clay, which served as the mold for the actual animatronic. So it was key to get everything right, down to the crevices on its horns and skin. Arjen cast the mold with foam latex, a departure from the modern standard of silicone.
We opted to go with foam latex because of the weight, but it also moves great in compression. Silicone would have worked, but it also would have made the terror dog about 500 pounds heavier than it already is.
With the mechanics and protective fiberglass shell, the terror dog ultimately weighed 450 pounds. Still heavy, but light enough to maneuver. Softer foam latex wouldn't suffice for every part of the creature, like its teeth, which were made with acrylic.
So they're actually hard. Yeah, you do not want to get bitten by one of these.
The acrylic created a degree of translucency, similar to a real set of teeth. But it would be too brittle for the dog's nails, which needed to be strong enough to endure the physical demands of shooting. So they used urethane resin for light, tough, and hollow nails.
If they would get hit or somebody would accidentally step on it, they wouldn't break. So there's a lot of thought that went into it.
These horns were also made of the same resin as the nails, which let light in to look more realistic on camera. Look at the difference between the horns made during paint tests and the final version.
It just absorbs the light like a real horn would.
The horns also needed to be sturdy, since they needed to be removable. The crew only made one terror dog animatronic to stand in for both Zool and Vince Clortho. So they built the horns with magnetic attachments, which could easily be swapped out. These longer horns were for the male, and these shorter ones were for the female terror dog. But for practical creatures to look convincing, they ultimately have to move realistically. Unlike more traditional puppeteering, animatronic work requires mechanized motors known as servos, which can be programmed to create specific movements. Instead of cables and strings, they're brought to life using controllers. For Afterlife, the terror dog would have to be designed to fit all the servos inside, and there were a lot of them. The terror dog had 21 servos in its face alone to allow for subtle expressions, and one mouth movement could take 3 people to perform it.
Because the mouth is so big, the servos have to move a lot of material to make it look right.
For example, the servos needed the ability to rotate and move a lot of skin around for subtle movements such as blinking, squinting, and sniffing. So the foam latex was much thinner in the face and neck than the body.
If you know a part's going to move more than something else, you might make deeper wrinkles.
You can see that feature in the neck, which Arjen knew would be heavily utilized and gave Sturgeon the ability to imitate a very specific head turn the original puppet did in 1984. It could even look like it was actually eating out of a bag of dog food during this moment. The terror dog also needed to open its mouth wide, meaning placement of the jaw's pivot point was also key.
We had to figure it out. Can be too high, can be too low. It would look odd.
Going down the rest of the animatronic's body, the foam latex could be much thicker since it had less animatronic movement. But it still required some crucial additions. Sturgeon placed a linear actuator in the beast's stomach. This specific servo would only push out in a straight line to mimic realistic breathing. This full body shot of the terror dog right here, that's actually CGI, as Ariane and his team never created its back half for real. Instead, the top half was attached to a cart with 2 weights on it. The cart made it easier to move the heavy puppet around, so it could be placed on the hood of a car in one shot. Puppeteers will also rely on traditional cables when the movement calls for it, like with this snarl, one of the most complicated movements for the dog. Sturgeon used cables to work alongside the servos and the lips to really nail the look.
That's actually a number of servos working at the same time to give it left and a right side and snarl.
And in these quick shots of a skeleton miner, the ghost needed to handle a coffee mug. So creature designer Tanner White designed this cable system that connected his hand to the miner's hand.
Each of the joints was the real limit of the actual hand joint, so it didn't move when it shouldn't. So each finger correlates to the finger movement, and since you use your own hand strength, you can grasp things a lot stronger than you could with a radio control. To grip something like the cup here, basically you just pull all the fingers and the wrist movement down so that he's grasping, and then if you let go, whoop, he drops it.
Giving life to these creatures can mean some very uncomfortable positions for the puppeteers. While the miner's eyes were radio controlled off camera, Ariane had to cable operate its brows and other parts of its face through the bottom of the puppet. That meant crouching under the diner counter to avoid ending up on camera. For some moves, it's easier just to puppeteer a single part of the anatomy on its own based on what's shown on camera. Like in the close-up shot where the terror dog stomps its foot down on the hood of Red's car. To get the full force, Ariane created a separate terror dog leg made of the exact same materials. Puppeteer Ron Binion grabbed onto a metal armature inside the leg to move it. But the leg was so big that a human arm couldn't reach the foot. So cables were used to give convincing ankle and toe movements.
When I'm moving it, I want to move it in arcs that are similar to what the terror dog would do. On the day of shooting, I was up pretty high, same way, and trying to get myself out of the shot. I'm looking at a spot on the car hood where I'm aiming, but also trying to keep myself out of the frame. And if I'm pushing down, you can still see the foot adjusting and moving and flexing as the creature would be, shifting on its weight and sort of coming down hard.
And just like an actor, a practical creature needs some makeup before being camera ready. That can be as simple as a glossy shine on the skin or some drool. So the crew applied a product called Ultra Slime to the dog's lips on set.
So we would do this just before the take and set it, so in other words, if you would start moving, it would string and start stretching. You can see it just starts like dripping, but you gotta catch it at the right moment. But that's the fun part about it.